Hello and welcome to a new and improved Mastering Dungeons. Well, the show is new. This episode is new. The show is not new. We'll see if it's improved. I'm Shawn Merwin here, back from quite a vacation. Is Teos Abadia? Hey, Teos, what's happening, my friend?
I actually, this sounds like one of those like a line out of the movie Airplane. But do you like movies about gladiators? I spent 3 days in a German prison. It was an airport prison, but still 3 days locked in the airport because my passport only had 78 days remaining instead of the 90 they wanted on a 12-day trip to Italy. Uh, all of it ended up being that I was delayed in getting to Italy by a week. So
Mm.
that's a new travel experience for me, Shawn. It was,
Yeah, I would say that's a new travel experience probably for many folks. Uh,
unlock. So shout out to the,
yes.
Bundespolizei. It was super nice hanging out with you folks. Love the work you do.
And so you spent a few days in Italy and many days in a German airport.
I did. I did. I got to
Yeah.
really know the levels of the mice problem that the Frankfurt airport has. It's high.
Hmm,
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Are you fluent in German now?
Fluent in mouse.
Fluent in mouse, German mouse.
German mouse. It's really complicated, actually. The
It,
nuances easy to miss.
yeah, excellent. Well, we're glad you're back. We're glad you're safe. Summer is raging on here in the US.
Yeah.
Gen Con is just a couple of weeks away as of the show dropping, believe it or not. And we put out a poll on Twitter asking friends and followers of the show there, what do you want us to talk about for our main topic? And I gave four choices. One was Vecna Eve of Ruin. One was the Greyhawk setting. One was the new rules for 2024 that are being released. And then one was talking about designing a long-term campaign. And the winner by a bit was talking about the 2024 rules that Wizards are releasing. And so I strongly considered, all right, let's do that. And then I made an executive decision, Teos.
Tell me
Uh,
about this because I don't hang out on Twitter much, so I didn't even look at the results.
yeah. Yeah. And it was like 50%, just less than 50% was the new rules. Like 30, just over 30% was Greyhawk. And then the other two were way, way down there. And so I thought, well, okay, we'll talk about the rules that they're releasing. And then I realized that if we really did a deep dive into the new rules, by the time we get into the meat of it, the new rules are all going to be out. So
Yeah.
rather than just discussing these little dribs and drabs that Wizards are releasing, a lot of it being like marketing material more than
Mm-hmm.
actual rules release, and then the vocal backlash to that. Why don't we just wait until the actual 2024 Players Handbook comes out in,
Yeah.
in a month, and then we can really, really talk about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing is that like I have the book, right? This is something that Wizards allows us to disclose. I was part of a group that got sent the player's handbook early and super watermarked with my name on it form, so I can't share it and anything. Not that I would. Um, and so it's hard for me to separate what I see publicly from what I've actually read.
Mm.
Um, my impression is colored because I'm not just seeing their marketing aim, I'm seeing the book itself, the good and the bad of it, as all books have. And so it makes it hard to talk about now, but once it's out, then we can really talk about it as it actually is, with everything that kind of fits together, I think a little more easily. um, yeah, I think that's it. That makes sense. So what are we going to
All
talk
right.
about?
So we are going to then go with what the poll said after that and talk about Greyhawk. Greyhawk will be the new in-book setting in the Dungeon Master's Guide that has been disclosed. And so what we thought we would do is, yes, Teos is holding up the box set, and I am holding up the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. And Teos is holding up even more Greyhawk goodness. So for our main topic for a bit now, what we will do is dive into Greyhawk as a setting, what it meant to the game when it first came out, how it evolved over time. We will dive deeply into the last iteration of the setting that was published in a coherent form and an official form, which was the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer. Deep dive into that, and then look forward to what we might see in the Dungeon Master's Guide using Greyhawk as a showcase for world building, a
Yeah.
showcase for
Yeah.
a setting, campaign setting.
Exciting. I love it. I mean, you and I are big fans of Greyhawk. We've spent a lot of time in there as much as any other setting. So great.
Yep, it's true. But before we get to our main topic today, let's dive into first our listener corner, where we have first via Discord, Lose Tack, who asks several questions, and I broke them up, so we'll do them one at a time. When designing a TTRPG, in what ways are the physicality of the expected books, such as page count, tyranny, layout concerns, and art decisions, improving or hindering the development of the game?
Mhm.
And I thought about this long and hard, and what I decided was I wouldn't want to make a blanket statement about what physicality means, either improving a game or a product or hindering a game or product's development, because I can think of cases where it might hinder, and I have lived through cases
Mhm.
where it did hinder. But then there are times when I thought that physicality will improve. So what I will say is that physicality can affect these products, these games, but I don't want to say hinder or
Mhm.
improve overall. What do you think, Teos, before I get into these stories?
Well, to maybe take a step back, what a lot of folks probably don't understand is that there's a real difference between when you're just kind of self-publishing and you
Mhm.
think to yourself, like, I'm going to make an adventure or I'm going to make a little source book, something cool, and I'm putting it together. You can write to your heart's content, right?
Mhm.
So, like when I did, a book on evolving magic items, I can just create sections and add pages. And then I go back and I chuck in some art and I publish it. And
Mhm.
lovely, right? I've just moved some things around so the layout looks half decent as best of my skills allow, and off we go, right? Because it's just a fairly low input, low cost that I'm taking on project. But in the world that we often work with the people that we work with, they are having to have all kinds of time frames, right? With Ack Inc., one of the things that was sort of funny was to hear them say, well, due to European distribution, here's the date for this thing, right? Like, okay, like, yeah, you suddenly realize the enormity of what these companies deal with, and you're a cog in that wheel and must fit your spokes into theirs. And
Mhm.
Scott would say to us things like, well, your monster content must be this size. And you start realizing, well, that makes sense because a monster can't be like a page and a half. I mean, it can, but that's bad. You want it to be on a
Mhm.
page or a half page, and there's got to be the art room and all this sort of stuff. And you start realizing, how the big kids play. And it's got to be done to the physical nature, or at least the layout of the book, with the your page count's already decided up front. And this is something that I also further learned with like working with Mike Shea and on Forge of Foes, is that there are certain page counts where suddenly the price changes for shipping, for printing, for all these kinds of things. And so there are these sweet spots you want to hit a certain number of pages. And so all of this starts getting dictated. And you really, for a professional project, at the very beginning, you start with that, right? We have a 126 page book. Here's what the first, here's how the chapters divide, the
Mhm.
pages devoted, all of that. And that drives all of that, right? Which is why, like, when I was working with MCDM and we were exploring the idea of kind of character paths and histories, the first thing I said to them was, this is too big, right? Your
Mhm.
dreams are too big. They consume too many pages the way you're talking about. And they're like, well, let's find out. And so we did it. And they go, yeah, this is too big.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I've been used to working that way, right, for quite some time.
Right. Yeah, and I learned very similar lessons to you, Teos, when I started working with Ghostfire. Our graphic designer and layout guru is Martin Hughes, who listens to the show. Hey, Martin.
Hey, Martin.
And he comes from a background of magazines, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's used to working in a certain way with magazines and role-playing game publishers. It's different, but it's more similar than, say, a novel publishing, right? Because
Right.
it's a larger thing. There's art that needs to be included, those sorts of things. So, Martin set up this process of laying out the book in a spreadsheet ahead of time, so we know exactly
Right.
how many
Right.
pages, how much art, where art will be, so we can go to our writers and say, hey, for this section, we need exactly this word count. Now, obviously, plus or minus, 20 words, fine.
Right. But pretty close.
But it needs to be pretty set. Yeah. And so that was one thing. So if you talk about just the layout of a physical book, you're talking one thing. You can also be talking about, when you talk about physicality or physical products, you can be talking about tangential, supplemental things, uh, like cards.
Yeah.
So I will tell this story. Say you're making a game and you want to make use of power cards. You want that to be an essential part of your game. So you're going to publish the book, but then for the Kickstarter, it would also include a deck of power cards that you can set in front of your players. No problem, right? Makes sense. But how big are those cards? How many words can those cards hold and still be legible? Okay, if your limit is then 300 words on a card, then every power you make has to be 300 words. If you go over that, what you're risking is the text in the book being different than the text on the card, which could be okay, but could cause terrible problems if, as the writer or as the editor, you don't make it perfectly clear that these two word counts, although they're different, and text are different, mean the same thing. And if you can get it down to less than 300 words for a card, why are you going over that in the text, unless it's going to be to give an example? So that's something where your actual game itself may change because of that. And it may be for the better. It may be less less convoluted if you are forced to get down to 300 words. It may make you rethink your design for the better, but it also could cause problems. And when you talk about physicality again, think about a box set. This is my favorite story, because when I was working on the Halls of Undermountain project, at first it was going to be a box set. And what did that mean? What that meant was they wanted a mini or a little token for every single monster that was going to be in the adventure. And because of the limitations of the minis and the tokens, I could only put in like 3 large-sized creatures into my adventure. Right. So right there, that's a huge limitation on design because of the physicality. And then what happened was, slowly over time, the box set lost the minis. Okay, it's still a box set though. Then it lost the tokens. Then it became, well, we can't do a box set, so we are just going to do a book. In the meantime, I had already turned in, play tested, and edited all of my adventure content. So I had to make concessions by not putting in large-sized monsters where I normally would have. Where it would have made sense to put in a large dragon, I couldn't. So then I started getting questions like, why didn't you use this instead of this? I'm like, well, funny story. And people just don't realize that, right? And so that is a great question, Luz Tack. That, yes, it definitely hinders, but it also can improve.
Yeah, it forces a certain diligence, right?
Which
Which is the good part of it.
Right.
And it forces an order of operations. which we see, for example, we've talked about this on Wizards products, and probably unfairly, all publishers have these issues, right? I think Wizards are the ones we tend to focus on, but we see where they go down this process, starting with the spreadsheet and the plans, and then suddenly something goes wrong, whether it's the Hadozi or it's some other piece, or we saw with Vecna Eva Ruin all this extra art, which maybe prompted this question, right? And the art, you can put it into the digital side, but at the end of the day, what that represents is you didn't play this game correctly, right? Mistakes were made or changes were made, and there can be reasons to do that, but it's you deviated from the plan, and you always pay a price when you deviate from that plan.
It's true. The next part of the question is, would it be much better or much worse if the game would mainly live on digital formats like the MCDM Codex and leave the books as a secondary concern, maybe just for a print on demand or a collector's edition? Would a digital-first TTRPG allow for easier maintenance and more granular expression?
All right, I want to hear your answer to this.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, let's set aside personal preference. There are people who just hate reading things on a screen, and they want a book in their hands. And Teos is pointing to himself. There are also accessibility issues with different media that you need to take into account. Sometimes people will have problems accessing the internet in places where they want to play, making a digital only version harder. And when I talk about digital only, I'm not talking about PDFs. PDFs to me, yes, they are digital, but they're still set. They're still a picture of a book, basically. What I'm talking about with digital is D&D Beyond, right? Where it's sort of real-time things happening.
Yes.
So if we set aside personal preferences and those accessibility concerns, digital, the real-time online content, seems to be superior in many ways for the reasons that were talked about in the question, right? Real-time updates, accessibility, granular expansion, et cetera, et cetera. You can make changes more quickly. You can link to helpful video content. Heck, you could offer real-time customer support. I'm setting up my game playing, and there's a question, and I go, Wizards, chat, hi there. We have a question at our table. Does this work this way? And you could have a person answer from Wizards. All of that is awesome. It helps make the game more useful if you are a person who wants those questions answered and that immediate interaction.
Yeah.
However, that flies in the face of the make D&D your own, right? If you're beholden to this, it's harder to say, yes, I know what the book says, but I want to do it this way, because you have less stability with where you're starting from if where you're starting from always changes. It also has the potential to counteract one of the most attractive parts of D&D for the 21st century audience, which is getting together in person, telling a story together, rolling dice and doing math. All of those things are being touted as big benefits of tabletop role-playing games. That's why in schools they're creating D&D programs. That's why we're seeing test scores for people who play D&D go up versus those who don't, right? Those sorts of things. And the more you digitize and synthesize and automate those things, the harder it is to gain the benefits of those things.
Yeah. I think, folks can probably identify with this if they play video games, right? A lot of video games that are online in some way, where it's just not just delivered to you and done, but there's a connection. What will happen is they will patch things, right? They will realize, this is especially true of MMOs, they will realize, well, that's kind of broken, so we're going to change it. And people will find that, they loved that thing the way it used to be, but now it's this other way. And you just have to adjust. You just have to deal, because you're not in control of your content. They are. And you must either like the overall experience or not. but you don't get to own it or keep it, right? And that's
Mhm.
what this is kind of getting to, right? So if you liked the original, glide feature of the Hadozi, well, when they made the changes to Hadozi for inclusivity issues, they also changed how the glide works. And the old version, it just fades, it disappears. There's no record of it until we push, we pushed Wizards hard enough that they added an errata document that is somewhere on the forums now. It's not in any central location, so good luck finding that. But then,
Mhm.
nothing out there is telling you that Vecna Eve of Ruin, hey, we've added art. And if they change something else, how would we know, right? Or when I talked about the inclusivity changes that happened to the player's handbook and DMG and all of that, they made these changes to the wording of the core books on D&D Beyond and didn't tell you. They just changed it. And that's fine because they're good changes, but your wording has changed and you're not even kind of fully aware of it, right? Until maybe you happen upon something that sticks out. And to me, that's a problem. It's this vision of the product control being solely on their side, solely on their discretion, rather than on your side. When you have a physical book, yeah, maybe you don't have the errata, but you have that book and no one can take that part away from you. And if they follow normal errata documents, or let's say old errata document procedures, well, you can print those out too, right? I think for fourth edition, I have every single errata document as a separate PDF somewhere on a hard drive. If I want them, they're there, right?
Mhm.
That's not the case with 5e. And it's not the case with a lot of these games that have strong online components. You lose that ability to control what you have. And then the really final stroke is it can all just go away someday. And you actually retain none of it, right? So not only do you not control its evolution, but if someday someone turns off the server, well, it all goes away.
Yeah. Yep. And I couldn't sum it up any more than that. So benefits, absolutely. Drawbacks, most definitely. A lot of it comes down to then personal preference, and personal preference will forever be personal. Boy, that's
Yeah.
really, that's some groundbreaking
Yeah,
intellectual talk right there.
we had Tim Hartford on our show, and his show
Mhm.
Cautionary Tales has an episode where he talks about a British effort to capture a time capsule of history in this particular area, and they put it on Laserdisc because at the time it
Mhm.
was like the clear technology that's going to merge. Well, then begin
Right.
these various efforts over the years to keep this data somehow available because it's like school kids put in information. It was a countrywide effort to put all this information together, and how difficult it's been to preserve that, and how it is
Mhm.
basically at the whim of a few people maintaining this website that now has the data, but at any point it can just vanish because that's just the way it goes with digital stuff. And he contrasts that to how in museums we have famous books that are preserved from so long ago, right? Ancient texts
Mhm.
have stood the test of time, but digital is not that way, even though we like to pretend that it is, right?
Right. Yeah, it's true. So great question to start, and another great question from the Welsh DM via YouTube. Enjoying the show, had a question, which I may have already posed to the other podcast, but I want to hear more opinions. So, when it comes to the much requested development of exploration and social interaction pillars for D&D, is the problem the actual core system?
Mm.
The D20 system hinges on a binary pass-fail mechanic, which is ill-suited to the nuance of social interaction and the fail-forward exploration. Systems like Daggerheart, powered by the Apocalypse, and Star Wars RPG have other things in place that help inform the narrative and drive the story forward in these situations. Should a future edition of, quote, the world's greatest role playing game be open to the possibility that the era of D20 systems, which works best for combat systems, is over and narrative storytelling is what the community wants more? Right. Lots of great
Mm,
questions within that. And when I
yeah.
read this question and started answering it, I was in grumpy Shawn mode. Uh, so take all of this. I mean, Grumpy Shawn is still kind of nice,
Yeah, it's
but is
relatively
a
pretty
little,
good.
yeah, yeah. But so here's a few things. I'll do one and then I'll let you chime in, Teos. So first of all, I'm not 100% convinced that players of RPGs these days really do favor, quote, narrative storytelling or role playing over game mechanics and rules and combat and this and such. I do think there's a huge segment of the gamer population that likes to watch people play and are
Mm.
more likely to enjoy the narrative storytelling as opposed to the grit of the rules and mechanics. But even then, they like that. Uh, so when you say, is narrative storytelling taking over and it's what the community wants? I don't think so. I think there might be more than before, but I think there were people like that before, and there are people still who prefer the rolling the dice and moving the minis around the map.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to actually see some, if we could have some way to check on that, right? Like whatever it would be, whether you could
Right.
go to like a, I don't know, convention footage of 30 years ago, convention footage today, and like look at play styles or anything, game stores, homes, like poll people somehow back then and now. It would be fascinating to know whether it really has changed. I agree with you that sometimes you get locked into this thought process that the world is all becoming narrative or some other permutation to that. And I'm not sure that it's as far as people think. There has been some change, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there at least people are more cognizant of this possibility that you can play that way, and I think there are more people who aspire to it. But yeah, when it comes to exploration, I actually see a lot of DMs. You mentioned players. I think a lot of DMs look at those possibilities and go, "Yeah, I don't want to do that."
Mhm.
Um, is the system part of the problem? I don't, when we looked at the player's handbook and the DMG, what stood out to me was not the mechanics don't allow for exploration. It's their exploration system is not really a system. It's fragmented. It's not explained properly. And it's across two different books and several sections of the DMG. We had to write a guide to how it works, right? Like, on our show, on our episodes, because it's so convoluted. And it took us sitting there and puzzling through what the heck 5e is doing with exploration. It's not clear at all. And I think the same is true of Daggerheart, right? Like for all that it is, this pro narrative,
Mhm.
whatever. And I get that, and I respect that, and I appreciate it, maybe more than Shawn, or especially Grumpy Shawn. I think that
Mhm.
Daggerheart does not really tell you what outdoor exploration is like in Daggerheart.
Mhm.
It sort of expects you to magically do it. Well, that's what 5e does too, is expect you to magically do it. And
Yeah.
DMs don't magically, I mean, some of them do, and that's the magic.
Mhm. Yeah. So you took parts of two of my next things. I am not 100% convinced that people who claim to want robust exploration or social interaction really want what they think
Mm,
they're asking for. Uh, if people were like D&D doesn't give me the exploration and social interaction that I want, but this other game does, and we're going to go play this, that game hasn't been invented yet, at
mhm,
least as far as I have seen. Or if it has, people are not flocking to it and playing it.
yeah.
So, are you sure that you want detailed tactical exploration and detailed tactical social interaction, a robust system that's as story changing as combat is in D&D? You want
Mm.
to die because you failed several roles in a role-playing situation? Because that's what combat brings. And
And,
if
and
you're
and maybe
saying that you
that's
want that,
maybe that's the key, is that combat's a little easier for a DM to throttle. It's still difficult,
right?
right? We see DMs everywhere
Yeah.
saying like, I don't know how to challenge my players and things like that. But in general,
Mhm.
like, well, I can put two solo bosses and it's gonna be twice as hard, right? There's some amount of understanding of that. I can add a
Mhm.
trap to this room that already has a bunch of monsters in it, and it's gonna get harder. There's some of that
Mhm.
understanding. I think a lot of DMs don't really know, well, how do I make it more exploring?
Mhm.
And how do I make the trip from A to B interesting for everybody? And that is less easy to grasp, right? But both systems have faults, or let's say are imperfect and require tweaks. It's just that to me, exploration and role playing are pillars that have less guidance to them. So you must do that trip on your own.
Right. But do they do we really want that? Right. We
Well, I think we
say,
want different
boy, I
things.
wish the X right, right.
Each group, right? Like it was
Yeah.
interesting when I asked my players and I was running Tomb of Annihilation, right? And I said, okay, you know, what kind of campaign do we want? They made it really clear they did not want to have to deal with survival. They did not want to have bug bites and water contamination and running out of food or supplies. That was not what they wanted. Okay, so I took that out, right? And in fact, one of
Mhm.
the players was a ranger, so there went getting lost. And so then it was really what exploration was about situations, right? Interesting
Mhm.
situations, uncovering secrets, finding out what's in the jungle. It was not about any of this sort of survival, getting
Mhm.
lost kind of aspect. That was all not of interest to them, right?
Right.
And I think every group's different,
Yeah.
but no guidance is there.
For Aurora, we made a very robust system for starting at a base, going and you're trying to rebuild society. So you start from a safe place, but you go out and you try to build other safe places. So there
Mhm.
are checks to make to find the best place. And if you do not succeed well at that, you are end up building and using resources to build on a place that's not safe. So you can do so, but you can only grow it so far. And there's a system for how big your settlements could be, right? We made this whole exploration system. And I I think it's good. Playtests have shown it. It seemed to capture that, but nobody's rushing out to play it,
Mm.
which makes me think, did you? I mean, and it's not just a system on its own, right? Then there are
Yeah.
combats you make, and there's role playing you can do to bring settlers in and make it safe and fight off the threats. And it, so it just it makes me ask, if you built the perfect exploration system, are people going to go, oh, and still have good combat, right? Are people going to go, oh, this is what exactly what we were looking for, and I'll go off about? I don't think so. And that brings me to the
Mm.
other thing, which is I'm not 100% convinced that many other game systems, including the ones named above, do a better job at handling exploration or social interaction than D&D does in actual mechanics or gameplay.
Well, a lot of it may depend on the DM too, right? So I think that like the idea of fail forward or you know, Daggerheart, you succeeded Daggerheart Star Wars, right? The succeed with a complication or anything
Mhm.
like that. That can for some DMs, that's very like it's exactly what they need to prompt them to do a certain thing. Just
Mhm.
like in Monty Cook games, the idea of a DM intrusion can be great for some DMs. For me, if I want those things, I'll do those things. I don't actually need the dice to drive that, and I can
Mhm.
adjudicate that just as well. So for me, a D20 roll, there's no problem at all with it. That's not to say system isn't important. I've been playing with some friends through the Call of Cthulhu starter set, and I know you've got
Mhm.
thoughts about that game, and you know, in playing them, it reinforced for me those thoughts that you've expressed before, where the mechanics don't do a whole lot for the system. You know, having
Mhm.
such a high chance of failure and the method by which that's done, the way the rolls are, where the DC is essentially always player based, it to me it does not really create a lot of story through the rolling. So it's maybe the opposite of what some of
Mhm.
these systems are, and I do see that impact, right? So it's not that there isn't any impact, but I will say again, I think that the biggest factor is whatever your system is, do you understand how to tell a story with it? And I know there are people out there who'd say Call of Cthulhu is amazing in my hands. I know how to make this thing sing. Yep, you do. Does everybody? No, right? And so I think it's at the end of it is it's the
Right.
system and what the system's telling you to do with it. And if Daggerheart doesn't tell you what to do with it, and 5e doesn't tell you what to do with it, if Star Wars RPG doesn't properly tell you what to do when you keep on rolling, succeed with complications, and it feels boring to either assign minuses or to keep coming up with little things that go wrong, right? How to handle that. You know, those are things that GMs struggle with, and your system needs to address that so you know how to make it a great experience. which varies by group.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We could go on
Yeah.
forever, and we could break down as we have, right, these other games and how they handle getting away from a strict pass fail rule. And a lot of them do, but the question is, does it do that in a way that is really narratively exciting or
Mhm.
mechanically exciting? Or is it just, well, you succeed, but there is this one little consequence that I can make narrative, I could make mechanical, but does it really change the game in a way that is fulfilling over time? Or is
Yeah.
it just, well, with a Powered by the Apocalypse, right? I rolled a six to eight or whatever the middle ground would be for that
Hmm.
rule. And so, oh, well, I hit with my volley, but I have to mark off an ammunition. So, yes, it is a little better than just strictly pass fail, but does it really change the game enough? For some people, that is. For some
Yeah.
people, marking
Yeah.
off that piece of ammunition is big enough uh,
Right.
of a difference between pass fail and not.
Yeah. And other folks will say that the secret is to say be shadow dark, where by not filling in all the holes, you create more
Mhm.
open play, right? But for other
Right.
people, they will say, well, I've got all these holes. Someone tell me what to do with them. All right. And that's that.
Mhm.
Please,
Right.
nobody write comments about
Yeah. Please. No, no, no more. Uh, so thank you again to the Welsh DM for that provocative question trio. And now we'll get into our news and commentary section, starting with a bit of news about Kyle Brink. So Teos, tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, we've been wondering about this. In fact, it's been a conversation topic on our Discord, kind of along the lines of where's Kyle? Because both it's been really quiet, and there were a few other things kind of happening on the sidelines that suggested maybe there'd been a change. And finally, there's been an update. And actually, we reached out to Wizards to say, hey, can you give us an update on the leadership team? And is Dan Rawson still there? Is Kyle still there? There's this new VP that you covered last week on the show. So finally, there's an update on LinkedIn for Kyle Brink's page, former executive producer. So he did indeed leave that position or asked to leave or some permutation of that, which is very interesting, right? I mean, if we look at the 2024 rules, we've had two changes at the top during that time period, right? And to me, there's no way that that doesn't create an impact. We've reached out. I wrote to Wizards to ask for additional information. Is someone else stepping into this role? Is Dan still there? I think he is, but it's not clear because he's a senior VP, and we now have got a VP. But it's interesting and always interesting to see how these changes can impact the team, can impact the game itself. It's hard to track those impacts, but there have been historically big impacts depending on who's at the helm. Also, to me, organizations tend to do this, right? Where someone might rise through the ranks. What seldom happens is someone going back down into the ranks, right? So Kyle doesn't stop being the executive producer for D&D and become whatever he was before. He leaves, right? And that's one of those tough parts of how this industry often works as well. Any industry, really.
Yeah, I hate to see people who are full-time in the industry leaving. And maybe it was, his choice. I don't know, but it's such a rare and wonderful thing to be able to work full-time in the RPG, tabletop RPG industry. And it's just
Yeah.
it's sad. And like you said, sometimes it makes a huge difference, and sometimes it makes no difference at all. And sometimes it's part of a business decision, and you never know. So I
Um,
wish Kyle great success wherever he is at this point.
yeah, absolutely. It has got to be so difficult to want to help the game and to
Mhm.
dare to want to take the reins of this game and try to lead it to a better place. because you must know, if you're at all looking at the history of things, you must know how perilous it is to do that as one's job. And I'm always aware of that when it comes to wizards, that any of these jobs, it's difficult to hold on to those reins for long. Hey everybody, this is Teos with an update, because after we recorded, just a little bit later, we heard back from Wizards of the Coast in response to a couple of questions, one of which ties into this topic specifically. So Wizards wrote back regarding Kyle Brink. Quote, "We can confirm that Kyle Brink is no longer working at Wizards of the Coast. D&D's new VP of Franchise and Product, Jess Lanzillo, is now responsible for those organizational duties. You can learn a little bit more about Jess here, and it links to the article we talked about last week in Ad Week. Link in our show notes, and you can hear us cover it in last week's episode. So that, at least, thank you, Wizards, for providing that confirmation. Really helpful. We had also asked some additional questions around whether Dan Rawson was there. That was not answered in this response that they provided. And we asked whether there'd been any changes on the other pillars, like the virtual tabletop side or D&D Beyond, but we were not provided with any information there. But it is good to know at least this confirmation, and that Jess Lanzillo is now the person that handles that. So if Dan Rawson is still there, it's Dan Rawson and Jess Lanzillo underneath, who now oversees the D&D team. Congratulations to Jess. And then we had two other questions that we'd asked Wizards. We had said, we had brought up what we reported on, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, where we talked about the D&D Beyond version of Vecna, Eve of Ruin. And we had said, hey, this contains additional art not found in the physical version. Is there any plan to itemize when there are differences between an online version and a physical version of the same product? So Wizards wrote back and said, the additional artwork was created specifically for use with D&D Beyond maps, and that includes additional creature NPC artwork. We expect that to be a feature of digital releases going forward. I thought that was really surprising. So it looks like they will be, when they commission work for maps, it won't just be maps that'll actually involve creature and NPC artwork or other pieces like that you can then include as part of your online offerings. So really interesting. I'll be curious what listeners think about that. That's kind of an interesting change, and again, not in the physical books, right? They did not really answer the question about itemizing, which to me is a big thing personally. I'd be curious whether to listeners that's important or not, because now there are extra features that you don't know where they are, right? Like they're in this D&D Beyond maps category, but not in the book, but nothing tells you that. And if I'm a DM that primarily runs from paper, but I do have access to D&D Beyond for things like searching and session prep, it'd be cool if I knew that, right? Somehow. Our last question was, during the D&D Summit, we requested the materials from the old dnd.wizards.com site be copied over to the D&D Beyond site. This included the D&D studio blogs, errata, podcasts, and other content. And we wrote, we see that the website now redirects to dndbeyond.com. Has the information been lost? Is Wizards of the Coast planning on migrating that content? And what they said was, quote, some of the content you're referring to here was previously transferred over, and more will be coming. See the latest community update on this here. A lot of the older content will take a longer time, while some deprecated content like errata may not transfer at all. And that's interesting. I was curious specifically around errata, though I care about all of it because to me it's the history of the game and we lose that. But on errata specifically, I do worry about this, and it ties into the excellent question we had in the show of, what is the reality of the product, right? And is Wizards increasingly moving towards there is no reality to the product. The reality shifts, right? It constantly changes. Today we add content from maps, and tomorrow we remove this NPC, or we change this monster, or we clarify this feature, or we even remove a feature, right? Could a subclass suddenly change? And that's the way it is online, but your paper book shows it otherwise, right? That kind of thing. When there is no errata maintenance, then nobody can track it unless the community takes it upon themselves to do so. And that's a difficult task to get right. So It sounds like that is not something that Wizards is looking to do, from what I can tell from this. So very interesting. Thank you to Wizards for responding to this. It's certainly not something they have to do. They don't owe us responses on this, so we greatly appreciate it. And thank you to everybody on the community side of the Wizards team for helping with this.
But we're getting a new book from Shelley Mazanoble, speaking of Wizards of the Coast employees. The book is How to Dungeon Master Parenting. And you and I have both worked with Shelley
Yep.
a bit, so we know what a wonderful person and what a delight she is, very funny. And so this book is all about parenting using the dungeon mastering style. So gather your party. It's time to level up your parenting game. For years, millions of fans have looked to the beloved RPG Dungeons and Dragons for fun, friendship, and entertainment. And now parents or parents-to-be can use D&D to inspire and how to when it comes to their most challenging and rewarding role yet. Dungeon masters are not just expert storytellers and arbiters of the rules. They're compassionate, creative, quick-thinking leaders who embody the same traits that make a great parent. So this book is coming out in November 12th. We have links in the show notes to the University of Iowa Press, where it's being published, as well as to Amazon, where it will be available in paperback and on Audible.
Very cool.
So there will be
congratulations to Shelley.
Audible audio version read by Shelley, it looks like. So that's how I'm going to get it. And if you don't know, Shelley, works on the brand and marketing team at Wizards, and she hosted Dragon Talk back when it was still on. And Teos, you were a guest on there several times, and she also published books, including Everything I Need to Know I Learned from Dungeons and Dragons, Welcome to Dragon Talk, and Confessions of a Part-Time Sorceress.
Very cool.
Yep, I can't wait to hear that book coming soon. We also have heard about the Ennie Awards. They are awarded every year at Gen Con. With Gen Con quickly approaching, the nominees for this year have been announced. Nominees are picked by judges, and then the final winners are picked by fans. Voting begins on July 12th, so very soon after this show drops. Who and what were nominated? Well, I know one person that was nominated is sitting right here, and it ain't me. Teos's blog, Alpha Stream Game Design blog, was nominated in the online category.
Yeah, it is quite an honor. Best online content.
There you go.
There are a lot of other really good choices in this area, like the Alexandrian. Justin Alexander also has his book for best RPG related product, so that's great. I know he's won a silver before. It's really cool. I really appreciate it. I mean, we've talked about the Ennies. It's a fascinating award show. Imperfect in many ways, but it's probably the biggest one the industry looks at because it kind of captures both sides of things. One is judges deciding what should be out there, and it's an interesting system where judges cannot have worked in the industry for the year that they are judges or the year before. I forget exactly how it works, but they have to have sort of an independence from things, which historically they've been accused of not being. But then these judges pick from everything that's submitted. They decide how to organize all these categories and put it out there. And then fans will get to vote starting July 17th, I think? July 12th. So voting begins on July 12th through July 21st. And then the winners are announced at Gen Con for each of the different categories. And they give gold and silver winners for each category.
Yep. Lots of categories and lots of awards. Friends of the show who have been nominated. Well, the Judges Spotlight Award has already been given, and one of the winners was the Essence 20 RPG System Field Guide with authors Ryan Costello, Ben Heisler, Ginny Loveday, and Brian C.P. Steele. Best long-form adventures for Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, the Vecna campaign book, authors including Ashley Warren and Ryan Service. Vecna is also up for best setting. We have Eat the Rich by Grant Howitt, has several nominations. Kevin Culp, who's been on the show before, was nominated for his Swords of the Serpentine adventure called Losing Face. Best community content includes Adventures League and Miskatonic repository offerings. Best family game products, Little Game Masters, authored by Megan Connell and Laura Urban, among others. Shadow Dark RPG. We've talked about it, up for several awards: Best Game, Best Design and Layout, Best Rules, Product of the Year.
Yeah.
Other Product of the Year nominees were CBR plus PNK, Augmented by MythWorks, Eat the Reich, Rowan Rook and Descartes, Corico, A Magical Year by Mousehole Press, Not the End by Mana Project Studio, Outcast Silver Raiders box set from Esoteric Ludology LLC, Outgunned by Two Little Mice, Salvage Union by Leyline Press, of course, the Shadow Dark RPG, The Valley of Flowers by Phantom Milk Games, and 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, The Book of Nod Deluxe Artifact Edition by Renegade Game Studios. So,
And
congratulations to all the nominees.
yeah, and I want to say, one of the things I often hear folks say every year is, I don't know what these games are. And there's sort of two sides to this. One is, yes, because the Ennies often will pick things that may escape notice, right? I mean, anybody can submit and they may see a thing that isn't the biggest thing on store shelves or online or wherever, but it catches their attention and they choose it. Also, there are very few gamers that can play through everything, right? So there are going to be some things you've never seen, and that's a plus. If you go to the Ennies website, you can click on links and learn about these games, which is often worth doing.
Amen. You know what else is out there is Ghostfire Gaming's Playtest Part 2. So at Ghostfire, we are doing a Kickstarter in October called, drumroll please, Grimhollow Transformed. We are updating for the new version of D&D all of our player-facing and DM-facing content, as well as our lore. And we've already done a playtest of the Monster Hunter, a new class that we will be putting into our Grimhollow setting. And now we are playtesting the second thing, the Heritage system. This system was first designed by Scott Gray and me for Aurora Age of Desolation. We've iterated on the system in Valken Clan's book and then in our Ethereal Expanse book. And now we're bringing it as a core offering for Grimhollow Transformed. You can play test it right now. There are links in our show notes to sign up for the playtest. What we do is we say for $1, you get to get access to all of this stuff. And it also gives you, if you back the Kickstarter, a bonus. There's a link to our YouTube video where Ben Byrne talks about the Heritage system, what it is. And then there's a link in our show notes to sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter officially goes live. We'll be talking about this more, especially on the other show, the Eldritch Lorecast. But I'm very proud of this. I think Scott did a great job with it. And I think it is a new way to look at species and heritage for role-playing games, not just mechanically, but also narratively, that I'm very proud of being a part of. So you can check that out.
Very cool.
Tell me about Pelgrane Press's online convention, Teos.
Yeah, so Pelicon 2024. There was a convention that ended up being canceled, a physical convention, and gamers on the Pelgrane Press Discord decided, let's make this online. And the result is Pelicon 2024, an online convention taking place August 2nd to 4th. But you can now go to Warhorn. It's warhorn.net/events/Pelicon-2024. And if you go to that link in our show notes, you can sign up for Night's Black Agents, Trail of Cthulhu, Swords of the Serpentine, and much more. There's some cool people running games there too. And I think more will be added over time. So go over there and try out some Pelgrane Press games if you haven't played those before or have had an itch for one of these particular games that you and I keep mentioning. This is a great opportunity to try that.
There you go. Monty Cook Games is launching something new, but it's not a game.
Mm.
It is called the Anywhere Door, and it is a page for a project to build a community and resource site. So what this will be is a place where video content like streams and reviews can be hosted. Content creators can find resources. Fans can build a community. The site will be built on Moonbeam, which we've talked about before.
Hmm.
This is a site combining multi-channel video streaming and community chat features. And so it'll be interesting to see how this changes this landscape where everyone is easily using Twitch or YouTube and are sort of beholden to that paradigm and to those algorithms. And this is hopefully a way to start something new and better for the community.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's really interesting seeing Moonbeam kind of begin to, we can't say take off yet, but it's getting a lot of attention. They've got I was just looking at an image today that had all the logos of various companies that are supporting it or participating, using it in some way. And there are a lot of interesting logos there, like Cold Press and many other games. So Moonbeam's working hard, and it'll be interesting to see whether they really can redefine sort of how streaming and fan interactions can take place for our hobby.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that. And there's a link in the show notes to the backer kit where that is happening. Now to the creator corner, where we start with How to RPG. We've shared Jason Campbell's Kickstarter recently on The Light Fantastic. And now Jason has released How to RPG. It is a pay what you want product available on drive-thru that provides a guide for those who are new to D&D or other role-playing games. It tries to use simpler language to explain role-playing games and how to start playing. We have a link in our show notes to that product on drive-thru.
Yeah, very cool. And can I tell you what I was listening to recently, Shawn?
Please do.
This came from Discord member Scipio, who shared this episode of Writing About Dragons and SH Star T, a very fun show. And Jim Zub was the guest. I ran into Jim Zub at a convention once, really fun guy. Jim discusses working on the Conan comic, which is incredible, right? If you're an artist to get to do this, if you work in comic books, to be able to do this is incredible. And so he talks about that. But he also gets into the Rick and Morty D&D starter set he worked on with Pat Rothfuss. And there's overall a great discussion from everybody on the show about working on licensed properties, including D&D, and how the sweet spot and a really an important part of working on such properties is understanding and respecting the license owners themselves, right? So you're working on this Rick and Morty D&D starter set. You need to understand both what Rick and Morty and all of they talk about how Rick and Morty is, it's the creator, it's like 3 other companies that are involved behind it, and then there's Wizards and Hasbro for the D&D side. And you want to understand what all of them want out of this project and why you have to work a certain way. And they talk about how that was a struggle for team members at times to come up to speed on why things had to be a certain way, and how you can fight for some things you want, but you want to do that with the respect of understanding where they're coming from and these larger concerns they have than where you might sit as a creator. It's a really neat discussion where if you're interested on this kind of work at all and understanding how this works, it's a great listen.
Yep. And that, my friends, is our news and commentary section